Right now, as you are watching this, the National Interagency Fire Center is tracking 88 large fires burning at the same time inside the United States. In Oregon and Washington, crews are working fire lines that have not laid down at night the way fire is supposed to lay down. In Idaho and Montana, timber that has been drying since spring is carrying flames straight through the dark hours. In California, Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado, new starts are being reported faster than command teams can be assigned to them. And in Minnesota, in Florida, in Louisiana, in Virginia, in South Carolina, fire is burning in states most people do not even picture when they hear the words fire season. According to the NIF's National Fire News Situation Report dated July 25, 2026, there are 1,544,609 acres inside the perimeters of currently active fires. 21 of those large fires did not exist 24 hours ago. They were ignited, they escaped initial attack, and they were added to the national board in a single day, and the board is still filling as you watch this. Subscribe now because the next 2 weeks of this story are going to move fast. On July 18th, the country crossed into National Preparedness Level 5. That is the top of the scale. There is no Level 6. This is not normal news cycle noise. Before we get into the details, I want to be upfront about something. A big fire year, by itself, is not remarkable. The United States burns every summer, and the West burns hard every summer, and a headline about 1.5 million acres is the kind of number that scrolls past most people without landing. On its own, that number is not the story. What makes this particular moment worth a full breakdown is not the acreage, and it is not the flame footage. It is the calendar. The nation reached the ceiling of its own readiness scale in the third week of July, which means every national firefighting resource the country has is already committed, and the peak of the season, August through October, has not started yet. That is the part that changes everything below. Here is the documented picture, straight from the agency numbers. The National Interagency Fire Center moved the country to Preparedness Level 5 on July 18, 2026, and the country has been sitting at that level since. As of the NIFC National Fire News Report for July 25, 2026, there are 88 active large fires, with 21 of them newly reported in the previous 24 hours, and a combined 1,544,609 acres inside active fire perimeters. Deployed against those fires, NIFC counts 23,065 firefighters and support personnel. That force is organized into 511 crews, supported by 1,297 engines and 141 helicopters, and directed by 28 complex incident management teams, which are the highest-tier command organizations the interagency system fields. The geographic spread runs from the Pacific Northwest through the Northern Rockies and the Great Basin, and into the southern and eastern areas, with active large fires reported in Oregon, Washington, California, Idaho, Montana, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, Minnesota, Florida, Louisiana, Virginia, and South Carolina. That is 13 states across 4 time zones and at least 5 distinct fuel types, which is not how a normal July distributes itself. The numbers are also not static. The large fire count and the acreage figure are both revised daily as perimeters are remapped, and the new starts column is the one that has been climbing. What is still being monitored, as of this recording, is whether that daily new start number holds above 20. That is the reading that has not settled yet. But to understand why July 18 matters more than any acreage figure in this report, you have to understand what the preparedness level scale actually measures, because almost everyone gets it wrong. It does not measure how much land is burning, it does not measure flame height, or smoke, or damage, or deaths. It measures one thing: how much of the national firefighting capacity is already spoken for. Think of the country's wildfire response as a single hospital with a fixed number of beds, a fixed number of surgeons, and a fixed number of ambulances. Preparedness Level 1 is a quiet Tuesday morning in that hospital, with most beds empty and staff available to be sent anywhere. Level 2 and Level 3 are a busy shift, where local units handle their own load and the regional coordination centers start shuffling resources between neighbors. Level 4 is the night the waiting room fills, when several regions are competing for the same crews and the same aircraft, and someone at the national level has to start deciding who gets them. Level 5 is the moment the hospital declares that every bed is occupied, every surgeon is in an operating room, and the next patient through the door will have to wait for someone else to be wheeled out. That is what the country declared on July 18th, and that is what remains in effect as of this recording. The machinery underneath that declaration is worth understanding because it explains why the number cannot simply be increased. The American wildfire system is a mutual aid grid. Federal agencies, the Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the Fish and Wildlife Service pool their crews with 50 state forestry agencies and thousands of local fire districts, and they move those crews across the country through 11 regional coordination centers that answer to the National Interagency Coordination Center in Boise. In a normal season, that grid works because fire seasons are staggered. The Southwest burns in May and June, the Great Basin and the Northern Rockies burn in July and August. California burns hardest from August through October, and the Southeast burns in the late winter and early spring. When Arizona is on fire, Oregon lends crews. When Oregon is on fire, Arizona lends them back. The entire model depends on the seasons not lining up. But a report that lists active large fires in Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Minnesota, Florida, Louisiana, Virginia, and South Carolina in the same week is a report describing a grid where nobody has anything left to lend. Now the fuels, because this is where the physics gets tactile. Firefighters describe dead vegetation by how long it takes to respond to changes in humidity. Grass and pine needles are 1-hour fuels, meaning they dry out or moisten up within about an hour of the air changing. Small branches are 10-hour fuels. Larger limbs are 100-hour fuels. And logs, stumps, and heavy down timber are 1,000-hour fuels, which respond over roughly 6 weeks. Picture a stack of sponges of different sizes sitting in the sun. The small sponge at the top dries within an hour and re-wets in the first rain shower. The heavy sponge at the bottom takes weeks to give up its water, and once it is dry, a single afternoon of drizzle does nothing to it. When 1,000-hour fuels reach single-digit moisture percentages, the forest stops behaving like a forest that occasionally burns and starts behaving like a warehouse of kiln-dried lumber. That is the condition that lets fire run at night. Under normal circumstances, humidity climbs after sunset, the fuels pull moisture back out of the air, and fire behavior collapses until mid-morning, which is when crews do their most productive work. When overnight humidity recovery fails, that free work shift disappears, and a 12-hour operational period turns into a 24-hour one with the same number of people. Everything gets slower and more expensive at exactly the moment it needs to get faster. There is also a 100-year layer under all of this, and it is not the layer people expect. After the fires of 1910 burned roughly 3 million acres across Idaho and Montana in about 2 days and killed 85 people, the young Forest Service built its entire identity around suppression. By the 1930s, the doctrine had a name, the 10 a.m. policy, which held that every fire should be controlled by 10 o'clock the morning after it was reported. It worked, in the narrow sense. Fires got put out, but fire is how these landscapes take out the trash, and a century of putting out every small fire meant a century of leaving behind the fuel that small fires used to remove. Forests that historically carried 40 to 60 trees per acre now carry hundreds. The dead material that used to burn every 10 or 20 years in low-intensity ground fire is still lying there, stacked, waiting. Ecologists call the result a fire deficit, and the plainest way to say it is this: the country did not stop the burning, it postponed it, and postponed fire accumulates interest. Layer onto that a fire season that research consistently shows has lengthened by weeks to months across the western United States since the 1970s, driven by earlier snowmelt and hotter, thirstier air, and the arithmetic stops being mysterious. A longer window, more fuel per acre, and drier heavy fuels do not create a new kind of fire. They create the old kind of fire, arriving earlier, staying later, and running harder. And it is running right now. But here is the part that almost no one is covering, and it is the reason this report is different from 100 other fire reports. Preparedness Level 5 does not mean the fires are big. It means the country has no reserve. Those 23,065 firefighters, those 511 crews, those 1,297 engines, those 141 helicopters, and those 28 complex incident management teams are not a standing army waiting to be deployed. They are the deployment. That is the whole bench, already on the field. When a coordination center at Level 5 receives an order for 2 hotshot crews and a heavy helicopter, the order does not fail loudly. It gets what the system calls unable to fill, and it sits in a queue, and a fire that would have been stopped at 4 acres on a Level 2 morning is instead watched from a distance while it makes its own weather. This is the mechanism nobody films. Mega fires are not usually born big, they are born ordinary and left alone. And that is the cascade already in motion. Initial attack is where the entire American fire model actually works, because roughly 98% of wildfire starts are caught small, and the tiny remainder that escape account for nearly all of the acreage, nearly all of the destroyed homes, and nearly all of the deaths. When the national board is full, initial attack quality degrades everywhere at once, including in districts that currently have no fire at all, because their engines are on loan 4 states away. The risk is not concentrated where the smoke is. It is highest in the quiet places whose equipment has already left. That is happening in real time in districts across the West as you watch this. Then there is the human ceiling, which is the hardest one. You cannot manufacture a hotshot crew. Federal crews work 14-day assignments with mandatory rest, and by late July at Level 5, a large share of the workforce is already cycling through its 2nd or 3rd assignment of the year. Fatigue is not a comfort issue on a fire line. It is the direct precursor to the entrapment fatalities that this profession has spent a century trying to engineer out. Meanwhile, the aviation picture looks more impressive than it is. Spread 141 helicopters over 13 states and 4 time zones, and the density on any single incident is thin, and every one of those aircraft is grounded by the same smoke inversion layer that the fires themselves generate. The tool that looks most powerful on television is the tool most easily switched off by the fire's own behavior. But the sharpest edge of this is the calendar, and this is the part I would ask you to sit with. The national system reached its ceiling on July 18th. Historically, the heaviest weeks of the American fire year run from August through October, when fuels have been curing all summer, when the Great Basin and the Northern Rockies are at their driest, and when California's offshore wind season arrives and turns ordinary fires into fast ones. The country has arrived at full commitment before the hardest part of the year has begun. Every fire that starts between now and October will be met by a system that was already at capacity in July. There is a second cascade behind that, and it is a civilian one. Smoke from these 88 fires does not respect the state list. Particulate matter from Northern Rockies and Pacific Northwest fires routinely crosses the continent and degrades air quality in cities more than 1,000 miles downwind, and the people most affected are not near any flame front at all. Add the utility power shutoffs used to prevent new ignitions, add evacuation orders that stack on top of highway systems never designed to move whole counties at once, add an insurance market that has been retreating from high-risk zip codes for years, and the burn scars themselves, which turn into debris flow and flash flood zones the moment the first hard rain arrives on ground that can no longer absorb water. What has unfolded so far is the opening of that sequence, not the end of it. This is not a story with an ending yet. To make the stakes concrete, go back to the event that built this entire system. In August 1910, in the mountains along the Idaho and Montana border, hurricane-force winds turned hundreds of small fires into a single wall of flame that historians would later call the Big Burn. A Forest Service ranger named Ed Pulaski was leading a crew of about 45 men through the Coeur d'Alene country when the fire overtook them. He drove them into an abandoned mine tunnel, hung wet blankets across the entrance, and when panicked men tried to run back out into the firestorm, he stood in the tunnel mouth and stopped them, by most accounts at gunpoint. The timbers of the tunnel caught fire above their heads. Pulaski beat at the flames with water carried by hand until he collapsed, unconscious and temporarily blinded. 5 men in that tunnel died. The rest walked out at dawn past trees that were still burning, and the survivors described finding a landscape with no color in it, a valley of gray ash and black spars where a green forest had been the previous morning. Pulaski's eyes never fully recovered. He later designed a hand tool combining an axe and an adze, and that tool still carries his name, and it is strapped to the pack of a substantial share of the 23,065 people standing on fire lines across this country tonight. 116 years later, the most reliable instrument in American wildland firefighting is still a man with a Pulaski, digging line, 1 foot at a time, in the dark. To keep this danger properly in proportion, some honest scale. Preparedness Level 5 is not an annual event, but it is not a once-in-a-generation event either. The national system has reached the top of its scale in a substantial share of recent seasons, and in some years it has done so in the middle of July, as it did in the summer of 2021. Reaching the ceiling is not, on its own, evidence of catastrophe. What it reliably indicates is strain. And the second thing worth holding on to is that the vast majority of the 1,544,609 acres NIFC currently reports are burning in remote timber, rangeland, and backcountry where the fire is doing ecological work that these landscapes have needed for decades. Acreage is a poor proxy for harm. The contrasting case is the one that teaches the transferable lesson. In November 2018, the Camp Fire in Butte County, California, burned a fraction of the acreage reported in this week's National Situation Report, and it killed 85 people and effectively erased the town of Paradise in a matter of hours. What made it lethal was not size. It was wind, terrain, and the speed at which fire moved into a populated area with limited evacuation routes. 2 years later, on Labor Day weekend of 2020, an east wind event pushed Oregon fires dozens of miles in a single day and destroyed communities that had been considered outside the immediate threat zone that same morning. What the data does and does not tell us follows directly from that. NIF's numbers tell us the system is fully committed, that new large fires are being added at more than 20 per day, and that this is occurring before the historical peak. They do not tell us where the next destructive fire will start, or when, or which community will be in front of it, because that outcome is decided by a wind event that has not happened yet and cannot be forecast weeks out. Nobody can give you a date. What can be said with confidence is that the response margin that normally absorbs a bad wind day is not there right now, and the months that historically produce those wind days are ahead of us rather than behind us, which brings this to the only part of the story you actually control: First, sign up for your county's emergency notification system directly, today, on the county website, rather than assuming your phone will alert you. Wireless emergency alerts are not guaranteed to reach every device in every terrain, and in the fastest-moving fires, the official evacuation order and the fire have arrived at the same moment. Second, spend one afternoon on the first 5 feet around your house, because that strip decides more outcomes than anything else on your property. Most homes lost in wildfire are not consumed by an advancing flame front. They are ignited by wind-borne embers landing in bark mulch, in dry leaves in a gutter, in firewood stacked against siding, or drawn into an unscreened attic vent. Replace mulch with gravel in that zone, clear the gutters, move the woodpile 30 feet out, and screen every vent with 1/8 inch metal mesh. Third, build the smoke plan before the smoke arrives, because you may be hundreds of miles from any fire on the NIFC list and still spend a week breathing its output. Buy N95 respirators now, not cloth masks, which do nothing for fine particulate, and know that a box fan taped to a MERV 13 furnace filter is a legitimate emergency air cleaner that costs a fraction of a commercial unit. Fourth, and this is the counterintuitive one, call your insurance agent this week rather than after a fire starts near you. Insurers routinely stop writing and upgrading policies in a region once an active fire is declared nearby, so the window to raise a dwelling limit or add smoke and ash damage coverage closes exactly when you finally feel motivated to use it. Fifth, plan 2 separate evacuation routes out of your area and drive both of them once, because the single road you always take is the road everyone else will also take, and because these decisions get made at night with poor visibility. Sixth, keep your vehicle above half a tank throughout August and September. Public safety power shutoffs disable fuel pumps at gas stations, and a full tank has repeatedly been the difference between leaving and waiting. Seventh, make your house findable. Reflective address numbers at the driveway, an unlocked gate, and a garden hose visibly coiled with a nozzle attached will not save your home by themselves, but they materially affect whether an engine crew, working a street at 3 in the morning with limited time, chooses your structure as one they can defend. None of this is about fear. All of it is about being the household that does not need to be rescued, which is also the household that frees a crew to help someone who does. So here is what to watch over the coming days. Watch the daily new large fire count in the NIF National Fire News Report, because 21 new large fires in 24 hours is a rate the system cannot absorb for long, and whether that number holds, climbs, or eases will tell you more than any acreage total. Watch for the arrival of resources from outside the normal pool, which means military battalions or international crews from Canada, Australia, or New Zealand, because that is the visible signal that Preparedness Level 5 has moved from stretched to exhausted. And watch the transition into August, when the Great Basin, the Northern Rockies, and California historically enter their hardest weeks with fuels that have been curing all summer. I will be watching the NIFT National Fire News Situation Report closely over the coming days, and I will bring you an update the moment those numbers move. Subscribe so the update reaches you rather than the algorithm deciding you did not need it. This story does not end when this video does. It is running right now, in 13 states, with 23,065 people standing between it and everyone else. Stay safe out there.